Today, we're digging into the early days of the Roman Empire. But we're not just talking about the emperors. We're going to uncover who the real architects of power were, hiding in plain sight.
Right, we all know the big names. Augustus, Tiberius, Nero. Their faces were literally stamped on the money. But you have to ask, when one guy has all the official authority, what happens right next to the throne? Who has power over the most powerful man in the world?
And look, this isn't just us guessing centuries later. Roman writers, guys like Tacitus and Suetonius who were documenting all of this, they were obsessed with this very question. And they wrote about a kind of shadow government running things from inside the emperor's own home. So, let's see what they had to say.
Our story really has to start with a woman who basically wrote the playbook for this kind of influence, Livia. She was the wife of the very first emperor, Augustus. But she wasn't just a wife. To a lot of people, she was a co-ruler.
And this is where it gets interesting, because you have to look at who's telling the story. So, did Augustus genuinely choose Livia's son Tiberius as his heir? Well, if you read the historian Velleius, who was a big fan of Tiberius, he paints it as this obvious choice, the best man for the job. But then you get Tacitus, who suggests it was all a scheme by Livia to make the dying Augustus look good by comparison. It's a world of rumor and insinuation.
According to Tacitus, Livia's power was no secret at all. He claims that by the end of Augustus's very long reign, she had so much influence that ordinary Romans felt like they were being ruled by his wife, not by him. I mean, that's not just palace gossip. That was the word on the street.
And her influence didn't just stop when her husband died. Oh no. She kept that power over her own son, the new Emperor Tiberius. In fact, Tacitus gives us this incredible detail. One of the main reasons Tiberius just abandoned Rome to go rule from an island was to get away from his mom. Can you imagine? You're the most powerful man in the world, and you're still running away from your mother's bullying?
Okay, so if Livia created the model, things really get turned up to 11 under the Emperor Claudius. His court is where the influence of both imperial women and, crucially, freedmen, these are formerly enslaved people working in the emperor's inner circle, just hits its absolute peak.
You have to understand, these three men, Pallas, Narcissus, and Callistus, were technically just Claudius's secretaries. But in a system where the emperor didn't trust the Senate, these guys became the real engine of the empire. They controlled who got to see him, they managed the money, they sold off government jobs. The historian Pliny even tells us they were richer than Crassus, who was famously the wealthiest Roman of his time. They were absolute titans.
And, well, Suetonius just nails it with this quote. He writes that Claudius was so completely dominated by his wives and his freedmen that he wasn't really an emperor at all. He was their servant. They were the ones making the big decisions. It was a total reversal of the master-servant relationship.
But it wasn't just the freedmen running the show. Enter Claudius's niece, who then becomes his wife, Agrippina the Younger. She was Livia's great-granddaughter, and you could say she'd learned the family business. Tacitus doesn't beat around the bush. He says she wasn't just after a little influence, she was aiming for total supremacy.
And her plan, at least according to our sources, was just methodical and absolutely ruthless. First, she marries her uncle, the emperor. Then, with her ally the freedman Pallas, she gets Claudius to adopt her own son, Nero, pushing his actual son Britannicus to the side. She gets the military on her side, and then, once all the pieces are in place, historians like Josephus claim she had Claudius murdered with poisoned mushrooms, clearing the way for her son to take the throne.
And that brings us to the final, and frankly, pretty bloody chapter in this story of shadow power. The toxic relationship between the new emperor, Nero, and the mother who put him there.
At first, it looked like Agrippina's plan was a massive success. I mean, early in Nero's reign, they actually minted coins that showed mother and son face to face, like equals. It was a very public message that she was a co-ruler. She'd gotten that supremacy she wanted.
But, you know, that kind of arrangement was never going to last. As Nero got older, he started to push back against his mother's control. The historian Cassius Dio gives us this incredible scene where, during a huge fight, Agrippina just throws the ultimate truth in his face. It was I who made you emperor. She was reminding him that his power was a gift from her, and a gift she could take back. And from that point on, their relationship just completely imploded. Tacitus gives us the grim timeline. Nero starts openly defying her. Agrippina gets desperate and, according to the sources, makes a pretty scandalous offer to try and win him back.
And finally, after a few failed attempts, including a wild scheme with a collapsible boat meant to drown her, Nero just sends assassins to finish the job. He killed his own creator.
And he didn't stop with his mother. Suetonius gives us this absolutely chilling final verdict on Nero's reign. He ended up murdering his wife, his stepbrother, pretty much every relative he had. This whole game of family power politics that had defined the dynasty for generations, Nero's solution was to just wipe the entire board clean.
So, after all that turbulence, what's the big takeaway? Well, it's pretty clear that in the one-man rule system of the early Roman Empire, official power was only ever half the story.
The people we've been talking about, they had this whole toolkit of unofficial power. We saw them use their personal relationships to run the government, use marriage to build alliances, and use succession plots to literally pick the next emperor. And when all of that failed, they resorted to poison and daggers. According to the ancient sources, this was the real currency of power in the court.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. Was all this backroom dealing a fundamental weakness, a bug in the system that just led to chaos and murder? Or was it a necessary feature, the thing that gave a really rigid state the flexibility it needed to actually work? The ancient historians give us all the drama, but the answer? Well, that's something to think about. Thanks for watching.